Hello, David Monteith again. It's taken me a while to get back into making these videos for a number of reasons. A big one was I felt a little heartbroken by some of the things I was seeing on social media from people that I know and respect, and it broke me a little bit. And this is why. I was watching people who had absolutely nothing to say about someone dying in the street with a knee on their neck, nor a word about any of the other abuses that are continually coming to light. But the moment the reaction to those things goes to a place they don't like, makes them uncomfortable, they come out shouting and screaming. And in my mind, if you're using your platform to highlight one specific thing over another while claiming that you still care, you're pinning your colours quite plainly to the wall. And I actually found that quite painful to see in some of the people that I know. Anyway, the other thing I began to realise, well, I already knew this, but it's really become apparent, is that there are things that I and many other black people take for granted, things we just know through years and years of dealing with them and through experience, that others, that a lot of white people don't know. And they don't realise, and their reactions come from a place of just not knowing. So before I talk about certain other things in the days to come, I want to talk about definitions. The first thing to bear in mind and to come to terms with is that language and its use changes. Language is dynamic, it's not static, it's a living thing. Meanings change, they evolve. That's just a fact of life. You have no choice but to come to terms with that. To deny it is an astounding act of ignorance and belligerence. So, for example, there are records of Queen Elizabeth I launching a ship and declaring it awful. She said, "This ship is awful." And what she meant wasn't that it was a terrible ship. It meant that it filled her with awe. Language changes. In the same way, language around us is changing, and I need you to be up to speed. So the first definition is going to be racism. There is so much confusion here. See, when I was a kid, racism just meant that someone was showing prejudice from one race to another, regardless of what race it was, regardless of which way round it went. Fine, makes sense. However, as our understanding of social dynamics has increased, it's come to mean something slightly different. The new definition is that prejudice from the dominant body is racism. So in a society where white people are dominant at the top of the chain, in general, racism is a one-way thing from white people to black people. As a black person, I can be prejudiced against you. I can show prejudice, and while it may affect you as an individual, it doesn't have a systemic consequence. I suppose you could say the same thing is true about men and women with sexism. This is the definition now that we're working to, and I utterly understand the confusion surrounding it. I don't particularly like that development, but in terms of our understanding of social dynamics, it does make sense. Privilege, I want to define that. So this refers to an inherent advantage possessed by a person, and it comes in so many shapes and forms. As a man, I'm more privileged than a woman. Doesn't feel like I am sometimes because I've had lots of female bosses and life is hard and I've struggled and I'm still struggling. But in general, I as a man am more privileged than a woman. There's things I don't need to worry about because I'm a man. I've seen it. My wife comes in and someone's made a mention to her with the baby. She's got a certain kind of comment. And I know if I'd been there, no one would have said anything because I'm a man. I know that. People who are classically good looking even are more privileged than people who aren't. Just ask a bunch of aspiring actors who don't quite fit the mould. They get labelled as character actors. Go and have a look at your character actors. They're never classically beautiful. You'll see. There's accent privilege. Speak a certain way and see how much harder it is to get a job. I teach podcasting. Podcasting is my thing. And the amount of people who start a podcast and they try to lose their accents because they think they won't get taken seriously. You know, they think they need the BBC accent and they try and lose it. Privilege comes in all shapes and forms, and also in colour, in white privilege. Being white privileged doesn't mean your life isn't hard and it isn't rough. It doesn't mean you haven't had tragedy and pain. It doesn't mean your achievements aren't hard won and meaningful. It doesn't take away from you at all. It does mean that as a white person, you don't have to say to your child, listen son, because of your colour, we need to have a talk about how to deal with the police. It doesn't mean that, or if my mother goes into the hospital pregnant, she is 5 times less likely to come out alive than yours. Privilege. It means the odds are just not in our favour. Not that your life is worthless. It doesn't mean I'm accusing you of anything. It doesn't mean I'm calling you a terrible person. It's just something that needs acknowledging. It's like a short person at a concert is not as privileged as a tall person. It doesn't mean the tall person is a bad person. It does make them a bit rude if they don't move aside so the short person can see. And it doesn't hurt them to move aside. They can still see the stage. All we are asking is to think about how hard it is for us to see the stage sometimes. The third thing I want to define is implicit bias. This means that you make unconscious decisions every day based upon the way you've been brought up, the society you've been brought up in, what you have been subconsciously taught to believe. There are people I know and love that are so anti-racist, still making racist actions without even realising it. I have those biases. I've been forced to examine them, and mightily uncomfortable they are as well. I can tell you, I did not like facing certain things in myself, the way I see certain black people and Asian people. So in black people, that bias can express itself as colorism. That's something I'll get to another day. Now, if someone calls me the N-word on the street, and I know you, I know that person, I know you're blatantly racist, I'm cool with that because I see you. But how do I call, and you're probably not going to listen to me anyway, but how do I call out the racism I see that is a product of the biases you don't know you are showing? That's the hard one. If I have them as a black person, you as a white person can't tell me that you don't. So it becomes imperative that instead of a knee-jerk reaction that comes from an understandable defensiveness, you instead take time to examine your bias, your privilege, to embrace those definitions and use them as a guiding light to help make the world a better place. If you really believe all lives matters, then it's the decent thing to do, because racism, the things that result from privilege, the things that result from implicit bias are killing black people, killing women and minority groups all over the world. So please, take a moment to think. Realise I'm not accusing you of nothing. You just need to understand what's at play. Please.